It is possible to become free from debt, financial worry, your boss, and your zip code. You can start living a life you love, but first, you need to find your freedom. Using financial independence and lifestyle design principles, you can create the life of your dreams now. There are many paths to freedom, and that is what this podcast is all about. My name is Becky from 20free.co, and I am the host of the Find Your Freedom podcast. If you're tempted to take the leap into early retirement, self-employment, or just getting the heck out of your crappy job, this episode is for you. This is the first in a 2-episode series about quitting your job. In this episode, I'll discuss how I decided to quit my job and practical tips for helping you decide if you should quit yours too. I'll also discuss alternatives to quitting your job that could increase your job satisfaction and help work fit better into your lifestyle design. Here's my quitting story. I graduated college, finished out my temporary full-time position at a former internship, and promptly started working at this consulting firm. The good things. I had been promoted 4 times in 4 years. My job responsibilities continued to grow, and my work was increasingly challenging and dynamic. I had increased my salary by 25%. I had a good amount of flexibility to work from home or from a satellite office that was near my home once or twice a week. I loved my boss and my team. My boss was the best boss I'd ever worked for, and at the age of 22, I had already had about 10 bosses to compare. The bad things. I spent more time with my coworkers than I did with my partner, my parents, or my best friends. I spent 10 hours a week in the car commuting to my job for the last 3 years, which I made the most of by listening to podcasts and audiobooks, but I still hated the commute. I worked in a male-dominated field, where the majority of my coworkers were old enough to be my dad, and yes, they were pretty much all men. This meant that I had no social life at work, which was pretty depressing. While I liked my team very much, we didn't have much of an overlap in interests or life experience. I ate my lunch while I worked every single day in front of my computer. We all did. I worked on my business for an hour or 2 in the morning before I left for work and in the evening hours before I went to bed. But what I really yearned for was to be able to use the most productive hours of my day for my business. Consulting is a stressful field where you are always being pressured to work more billable hours, take on more projects, and do more. You had to meet your numbers, which were calculated using mandatory expected overtime. It was so stressful. My breaking point. I was put on a project that was disastrous for my mental health. At first, it seemed like an opportunity, but it quickly eclipsed all of my other projects until it was the only project that I had time to work on. All of the work that I had done in the previous year to do what's called job crafting, where I created the role that I wanted to be in, vanished completely. And there weren't enough hours in the day for the demands of this client or the limitations of this team. Ultimately, I was experiencing such high levels of stress and anxiety, which manifested as crying nearly every day, that I got completely burnt out. I hit my breaking point and I called my boss in tears to tell him that I could no longer continue on this project, effective immediately. I assured him that I wasn't quitting, but I told him I needed to transition out of the role as soon as possible. Then I immediately took a week of time off. When I got back, I transitioned out of that role. Ultimately, a team of 3 people took over the position that I was attempting to do in just 40 to 50 hours a week by myself. I got back to work on the projects that had fallen by the wayside for 9 months, which was a whole different type of stress. A lot of people were not too happy with me, but at least now I was only crying 2 or 3 days a week about work instead of daily. The burnout really opened my eyes to the fact that something needed to change. But I couldn't break out of the mindset that I needed to replace my salary in my business before I left my full-time job. So I devised a plan to ask for more PTO. When I asked, I got a hard no. Then I decided that I would negotiate a full-time work-from-home schedule to cut my 10-hour commute out of my life forever. I started working from home more in my current flexible position, but found that it was even harder to focus on the work that was stressing me out when I was at home. Working from home was not the solution either. So I figured maybe part-time work would do it. Decreasing my billable hour demands would reduce my stress, right? I thought for several months that part-time work at this company was the answer, so I crafted a proposal. If I could do the part-time work and work remotely, I could start living my dream lifestyle as a digital nomad and have more time to dedicate to and grow my business. Win, 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 right? The question you're probably thinking right now is, why did I keep trying to work at this company when it was making me miserable? Why not try to get a job at a different company? I had a couple of reasons for this. One is that I had a 5-year plan to stay at the company because after 5 years, my 401k match would be fully vested. I ended up losing 32% of my employer match in my 401k when I left my company, when staying for another 8 months would have seen me fully vested. This fit into my larger attachment to the idea that I wanted to go from a negative $100,000 net worth to a positive $100,000 net worth in 5 years. The second was that I was pretty sure that it would take me a few years to earn the level of trust and respect at a different company that enabled my flexible working arrangement. But I had become much more interested in lifestyle design and was convinced that I could figure out a way to make the flexible work arrangement with this company perfect for me. Finally, I loved my boss and didn't think I could find another boss that was as understanding and kind as he was. What I was failing to see is that my dissatisfaction with my work itself was going to sabotage my happiness no matter how flexible the work was. I wasn't finding the work challenging or meaningful, and on top of it being stressful, that fact just made me miserable. So what changed my mind? Well, essentially, all 3 reasons that I was convinced that I needed to stay were nullified once I did a little more thinking. Reason 1 was to stay at the company for the 401k match, and to stay in order to reach my admittedly arbitrary goal of going from negative $100,000 in net worth to positive $100,000 in net worth in 5 years. In November of 2019, I realized that I had surpassed my goal of $100,000 in assets, which I had always imagined as the amount of money I would need to feel confident in quitting my job, otherwise known as FU money. While I still had some debt and therefore hadn't reached a $100,000 net worth, having $100,000 in the bank was a huge confidence boost and a sign that I was financially ready to take the leap. Reason 2 was to stay at the company for its flexibility. This reason was nullified once I decided that rather than going to a different company, I would work for myself. That position, I reasoned, was the most flexible of all. And I didn't have to spend any time earning a boss's trust to be able to work from home or anywhere around the world. Reason 3 was that I loved my boss. Funny enough, my department's management went through some major shifts right around the time that I was making this decision. My boss got promoted, but that also meant that he would no longer be my direct supervisor. So this made my decision pretty easy. Plus, I was going to be my own boss, and I thought that sounded pretty great. I'll bet you have some reasons of your own that you haven't quit your job yet. Take the time to write them down and reflect on whether they're valid or not. Often these reasons are excuses to not leave our comfort zone. So, how do you decide if you should quit your job? It is likely that you should quit your job if you agree with any of the following. You work in a toxic or abusive environment. You cry about your job several times a week or even daily. Your job is having severe negative effects on your health and/or mental health. You spend all of your time at work Googling other career paths and searching for other jobs. You wish away all of the hours that you are at work, wishing you could be working on something else specific or in a different role. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that you quit without notice and without a plan. The only time I really think that that's advisable is if you are working in a toxic or abusive environment and working there is worse for your mental health than financial insecurity and the stress of conducting a job search when you are unemployed. You've probably heard that it's easier to find a job when you have a job. Depending on your situation, it can also be easier to negotiate flexibility-related benefits, more time off, working remotely, or part-time work with an employer that you've built trust with rather than a new employer. This is why I recommend that you make a plan before you mention a peep to anyone about wanting to quit. There are also a couple of options to consider besides quitting, such as changing your job or taking a break and transitioning to permanent leave. Here are the 3 main ways to change your job. Job crafting, which is increasing the time you spend on the parts of your job that you like, decreasing the time you spend on the responsibilities you don't like, and figuring out with your manager how to craft your dream role. Schedule changes, such as reducing your hours, going part-time, or working at off hours so you can use your best, most productive hours for something else. Consulting, where you no longer are an employee of the company, but they contract you for your specific expertise. You can charge more, get more time off, and work on your own terms. Taking a break or transitioning to permanent leave is another option, and there are several ways to go about this. Taking a leave of absence, which is often unpaid, but your employer will hold your position for you until you decide to come back or provide your notice. Paid sabbatical, which can be paid time off to pursue whatever you want, though there are often expectations or terms requiring you to return to work for a set period after the sabbatical is over. Or you can negotiate your layoff. This is something you can do to get a potentially longer transition from your job, as well as a nice severance package. I have heard of some people negotiating their layoffs to include staying on in their role for 6 months, but only working part-time while getting paid full-time to hire and train their replacement, while also being given a hefty severance package of 2 to 10 weeks of pay. When should you go all in on your own business and quit your job? I'd say this question has a pretty short answer. When you have a plan, a financial safety net, and you need to see what happens next. If your job isn't terrible, but it's just okay, that is the most insidious situation to be in. Being comfortable kills dreams. And self-employment is really uncomfortable in the most interesting, rewarding, and challenging ways. I aim to live my life outside of my comfort zone, and I have never been satisfied with the status quo. That's the reason I decided ultimately not to work from home, reduce more hours, take a break, or transition to permanent leave. I decided to quit because I wanted to go all in. Alicia Walter from the Passport Couple, who I interviewed in episode 8, felt similarly. She said she was worried if she didn't go all in, she would always wonder if the split focus was holding her back from more success. I felt the same. If I failed, would it be because I didn't go all in? If I succeeded, would I have achieved even more if I had a singular focus? This goes back to the concept of burning the boats, where in Viking lore, they would arrive on a shore and then they would turn around and burn the boats so that the only option was to move forward. This is a very powerful psychological concept in behavioral psychology, and it does a lot to help you get 100% committed to the decision that you're making and to the path that you're taking. That was personally something that I really needed to take that leap and be all the way committed to it. The next thing to keep in mind is this. What is the worst that can happen? If you are in a financially secure position, the worst that can happen is you have to go back and do what you were already doing. That means that you are experiencing the worst case scenario right now while working your job. There is unlimited upside to quitting and taking the leap, and limited downside. If you fail, you will end up right where you started. That's not a very bad downside, in my opinion. Besides that, there are so many other options besides going back to doing exactly what you were doing. You could get a part-time job. In an upcoming episode, I interview Jessica from the Pioneers, who decided to work part-time in order to find more balance between her life and work. Leave on good terms so you can come back to the same company, maintain your references and your network, but go back in a consulting capacity where you charge more, get more time off, and work on your own terms. Or even just renegotiate your title and salary. Leaving your job and then deciding to return gives you another opportunity to negotiate that taking a leave of absence would not give you an opportunity for. Go back into the workforce for another company that potentially fits your needs better. I hope that helped you decide whether or not you should take the leap. If your question is, can I afford to take the leap? Then you need to listen to the next episode in this series, where we will talk about everything you need to do before you quit your job, including ensuring that you're financially ready, figuring out how to have the conversation with the stakeholders in your life, including your partner, parents, and boss, deciding how much notice to give, figuring out the most lucrative time to quit, and planning your next steps. In that episode, I will talk about exactly what I did to get ready to quit my job, how my conversations went, and how I earned several $1,000s by quitting at a strategic time. Be sure to subscribe to Find Your Freedom wherever you are listening to this podcast so you don't miss that episode when it comes out. And check out the show notes for this episode at 20free.co/episode 9. That's the word 20, FREE.co/episode 9. Do you need help figuring out what's next in your path to finding your freedom? Let's work together. As a money coach and lifestyle design expert, I am offering an exclusive small group coaching program this spring. As your coach, I will help you gain clarity about what freedom looks like for you, develop a strategy to get there, and overcome your money roadblocks on the path to financial and lifestyle freedom. People work with me because they want to start living their ideal life, but they don't have a clear path to get there. And they don't want to spend years or even decades using trial and error and disjointed advice from the internet to figure out how to make it happen. I offer both the proven tools that will clarify your vision and path, as well as intense accountability to make sure that you take the action needed to change your life. So if you want to take the concepts you are learning on this podcast and apply them to your life with my help, apply for the group coaching program now. Applications for limited available spots in the spring 2020 program are now open. Visit 20free.co/group coaching to apply today and schedule your free 10-minute call with me. I can't wait to help you transform your life and find your freedom. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you're subscribed to the Find Your Freedom podcast on whatever app you're using to listen to this episode. Do me a favor and also leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go to 20free.co/iTunes to be redirected to the page on Apple Podcasts where you can leave your rating and review. I really appreciate it. If you think this episode would help someone you know, please share it with a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast. My name is Becky. You can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at 20freeco and sign up for free resources and email updates at www.20free.co. That's the word 20, FREE.co. I'll talk to you next week on another episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast.